Hi guys, this is Mr. Chapman, and I wanted to make a video for you as you get ready to work on your still life drawing. If you remember, a still life is just an arrangement of inanimate objects. So I think the chapter calls for 3 objects in there. You can do more if you want. So I just gathered a few little objects here to put together a still life: a jar, a little fake pumpkin, wooden box. And I would suggest, as you're looking for your objects, that you try to find things that are based on basic forms, simple forms. The 4 basic forms in art are cone, cube, cylinder, and sphere. So if you can find objects that are based on those or similar to those, it might be a little easier. So this has some elements of cube in it, kind of that octagon shape, but it has the cylinder up here. This, of course, is based on a sphere, lots of spheres, a little bit of a cone up there at the top, wooden box, obviously based on a cube. So find objects that are interesting to you, that aren't boring to draw, that aren't going to be too tough. Of course, if you want to challenge yourself and do something a little more complex, that's great too. Arrange them in a way that's interesting and try to set up your lighting so that you have one good light source. That gives you good shadows, good darks, bright highlights, and some values in between. Rather than having your light source come from everywhere, if you could turn off your lights and just have one light hit your objects. I'm here in my art room, so of course I have my art light, and I would turn off some of these other lights as I was drawing so I could have my light source coming from one direction. You could do that by putting objects by a window, or turning on maybe a closet light, or putting a lamp in the room so your light is just coming from one direction. Just some suggestions, but that can make it a lot easier when it gets to the shading if you have a controlled light source like that. When you have your objects arranged the way you want them, start by your contour sketch, like we did at the beginning of this chapter. Contour sketch is just the outline. And you want to make your outlines very, very light. They only need to be dark enough for you to see them, because you're probably going to erase a lot. I always do. So sketch out your contour shapes. You can kind of see some of my contour lines here. There's some areas that I've started to shade, but I wouldn't get to that until I had my contour drawing just right. So focus on accuracy, focus on what objects overlap each other, the relationship to each other. And remember, especially if you have something that is based off of your cone or cylinder would apply to, but especially the cube is going to relate to the perspective that we learned. So depending on how you arrange something like this, you might have 1 point perspective, or even 2-point perspective, which I don't think 2-point perspective is in the chapter, but you may have learned that. But these lines in my drawing would go back to vanishing points. In this case, there would be 2 vanishing points. But just like when you guys did the drawing of the room, same principle. So if you have something like a book or a box that's based on those right angles and those cube shapes, think about your perspective. Get that in there. Once your contour drawing is accurate, then you can start thinking about shading. And when I shade, I always go from dark to light. I get my darkest darks in there first, then my deep grays, middle grays, light grays, all the way to the whites. Highlight are going to be white. You can just leave the paper white for those. But I try to figure out where my deepest shadows are, start shading those in. In the case of my pumpkin that I'm drawing, it's kind of shiny, so it has some reflective qualities, so the lights and darks aren't always where they would be if it was a dull surface, but pay attention where your lights and darks are. Get those darks in there, and Once you have your darks, then I like to use a couple of tools. If you've ever seen one of these things, this is called a blending stump, which just is some very fine tissue paper that's rolled up to almost be like a pencil. These are great for blending. When you shade, try to get your pencil marks as blended as smoothly as you can. Try not to have a lot of pencil marks showing. You won't get rid of all of them by just using your pencil, but try to minimize those. And then using this will get those pencil marks out of there. It just blends your values super smooth. Of course, you could do the same thing with your finger by smudging it, but sometimes that leaves fingerprints and it gets you dirty. If you don't have a blending stump, which you can get those, I think you can get them at Walmart now. You can get them at an art supply store. Definitely you can get them off of Amazon. But if you don't have one or you can't track one down, something I use even more than a blending stump is just a piece of paper towel or Kleenex, fold it up a few times, kind of fold it into a triangular shape, and this works just as good as a blending stump. Sometimes it works even better because you can kind of blend bigger areas with this than you can a blending stump. But try to get all your grays established, your lights, darks, where those would go. Don't worry about texture at this point. Just worry about your lights and darks. Texture needs to come later. Texture is kind of like the final coat of paint on a house. You don't worry about that until the end. You don't worry about that until the house is constructed, the foundation is there, the structure's there, and it's stable. Same with the drawing. If your contour drawing is not there, that foundation, doesn't matter how fancy you get with your shading, your blending, your textures, your details, your drawing will still look off. So save the texture for the end. Just worry about darks and lights right now. And once you have the whole thing done, then you can start working on some texture. Like I got a little bit of texture started here in the wooden box. So it's got a lot of wood grain to it that I would want to show in my drawing. And I would do that just by drawing in where I would see the darks, and then using your eraser, almost like a pencil, draw in the lights. So this weird looking thing is actually an eraser. This is like a mechanical pencil, but eraser comes out. It's called a mono eraser, but you could use any eraser as long as it has a small enough point. Kneaded erasers like this, which are pliable, those are real good, but you knock them out of shape real easy, but those are good for creating textures. So those are just a few things to think about as you're working on your still life. Another thing to think about with that is your shadows, where your shadows fall, because the background is not the important part of this drawing. The still life itself is, but I would still get some things in the background, especially get shadows, so we get the idea that these objects are sitting on a surface instead of floating in the air. And maybe just a little hint of what's behind here. I don't know if you can see it, if the camera can pick it up, but I drew a little line here like to mimic the tabletop of this cart that my still life is on. I'd want a little bit of a hint of what's behind it. Again, not a super detailed background, unless you want to. But don't leave your background just white, and don't leave the bottom just white. Put some shadows on there, give some realism, some suggestions of what's behind your still life there. You guys did a great job in this chapter. I think you all have a good handle on perspective, and especially the contours. Contours are going to be really helpful on this, those cross contours, because those help us understand volume and the three-dimensional form. Remember, we can't make a real form in a drawing or on a painting. We just have to create the illusion that form is there, even though the surface is two-dimensional. And we show that with our shading and our sketch. So understanding those cross-contour lines really helps us understand the form that we're trying to shade, where those darks and lights and middle values need to be. So if you have any questions, if there's anything I can help you out with on this, please let me know. I'm super excited to see what you guys turn in. Thanks for getting the work turned in on time. Don't forget about that Unit 2 test that didn't get posted. It's in there now. I know nobody really looks forward to taking a test, but pretty important to get that thing out of the way. So good luck on your drawings. I can't wait to see them. Take care. I'll talk to you soon.